it was the first time that I'd gotten away from everything and just kind of was alone a lot and was able to just really sort of dive into my heart and think about what's going on in my life. What am I doing?
Hello and welcome to Center for Victory's podcast of Your Best Day Yet. At Center for Victory, we're here to help unlock, reinforce, and enrich relationships through personal and professional development. I am Eric Guy, Chief Victory Officer at the Center for Victory. With me today, very special guest, Mark Connor. Mark Connor is a boxing trainer, writer, former competitive boxer from St. Paul, Minnesota. I think you're going to be inspired by his story. His life and work reflect a deep connection to family, faith, and personal transformation. He was born in Minneapolis, raised in St. Paul. He grew up in a family with strong Catholic and Irish American roots, which we'll hear more about. His father, who was a Vietnam vet, and his mother, a teacher turned lawyer, both shaped his values. Mark began boxing at the young age of 10, going on to become an upper Midwest Golden Gloves lightweight champion at 17 and competing in national tournaments, including the 1987 Pan American Games trials. Despite his promising boxing career, Mark pursued higher education, earning a BA in English from the University of Minnesota while balancing academic life and with boxing. He boxed for several more years before deciding against turning professional, opting instead for an adventure of commercial fishing in Alaska. Later, he immersed himself in Native American culture, working with at-risk youth in a homeless shelter and reflecting on his own spiritual journey. He began writing at 16, and over the years, he produced freelance articles, poetry, and fiction. His first book, It's About Time, blends autobiography with poetry to explore themes of family, faith, and personal growth. The book, which Mark started writing after his father's death in 2019, weaves together his experiences with the Catholic faith, his Irish heritage, and his encounters with Native American tradition. He also reflects his process of reconnecting with his Catholic roots after a period of spiritual exploration. The writing of It's About Time was marked by personal hardship. In 2020, Mark faced the loss of his father, his mother's serious illness, COVID-19, the unrest of the George Floyd protests in his hometown. But despite these challenges, he completed the manuscript by March 2021, driven by a promise to his father that he would finish the book. The work was eventually published in 2024 after overcoming setbacks with the publisher and won the Irish Network Minnesota Bloomsday Literary Award. Mark's mother, who had read the manuscript, died in October 2023 before seeing the book to print. Yet Mark finds solace in the belief that both of his parents are watching over him as he continues his spiritual journey and creative endeavors. Through his book and life story, Mark shares his search for meaning, a journey marked by love, loss, and the pursuit of divine truth. Welcome, sir. Welcome, Mark. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So let's dig into this. Yeah, we obviously talked a little bit before we started recording, and you shared a lot of facts, and we could probably talk for days. It's very interesting of all your background and things, and we'll dig a little bit into the book because I think it's interesting as well. So, what role did your upbringing in St. Paul, Minnesota, play in shaping your kind of worldview and your career?
I think it's pretty central to how I see things and how I approach life. St. Paul is it's a very interesting city. I always say that St. Paul is overly humble and Minneapolis is overly confident. Um, St. Paul, Minneapolis. So the thing is, I say earlier in the book that I'm a product of a mixed marriage. My dad grew up in the St. Columba parish in St. Paul. My mom was from the Holy Rosary parish in Minneapolis. So being a St. Paul Minneapolitan, that makes me in this part of the country, we would call that a mixed marriage, which that's my little joke. But yeah, I was born in Minneapolis, but my parents were married and they raised me and my brother and my my older brother, a year older, in St. Paul. And St. Paul is a it's a small city, but it's moderately sized, significant metropolitan city, but it wouldn't be as significant without Minneapolis because of the metropolitan area. That's why we're called the Twin Cities. And Minneapolis is the same thing. It's a moderately sized, uh, a significant city in the United States, but it wouldn't be the it wouldn't actually be as significant as it is without St. Paul because we wouldn't have the numbers. Um, and St. Paul's got this real kind of neighborhood connection that people have. People come to the Twin Cities, they move here, and then for generations they don't leave. Even though we got people are scared away by the cold, but the summers are just incredible here, and it's a really beautiful place. Um, there St. Paul's a place where it's a little bit different. In Minneapolis, you say, oh yeah, I'm from Minneapolis. Where are you from? Well, I'm from the South Side. Like what part? What are your neighborhood? People start to think, well, why are you asking me that? But in St. Paul, you're from St. Paul. Well, yeah, where'd you grow up? And you say, what street? People they tell you, and you end up finding out you know someone. You either know another person who knows a friend or a family member of yours, or you actually know a family member, a cousin or something. That's just the way it is in the city. So people call it an overgrown small town. That's kind of the atmosphere of St. Paul.
Yeah, like those experiences. So, how did your experiences in boxing influence your personal and academic life?
Well, so I guess I started when I was 10 years old, and I wanted to be world champion the moment I started. That was the whole intention of doing it. I didn't think there's any other reason to box than that. Um, Um, I I guess I wasn't going to become a world champion, but I've been associated with a couple that the guys I grew up with and stuff. Um, but boxing is it's since the day I started it, I felt like that's my identity. That's who I am. I'm a boxer, and I call myself a literary pugilist because uh, but boxing and writing are the only two things that I've ever really excelled at in my life, or felt like they're really my skills that I have the best command on. Um, but I've always I've always I kind of thought I was going to, when I first answered this question, I thought I was going to articulate it better than I am, but I've always felt myself uh, to to be a boxer, and I've always kind of I look at uh, the balance that's necessary for boxing is how I approach my understanding of how things are supposed to work, whatever I enter into, and it's also influenced how I shape my day or structure my life because there's a real regimental routine that one has to go through to be a successful boxer.
What led you ultimately to choose writing over your boxing career?
I'd say it's a combination of physical injury, right? That which was one thing, and when I say physical injury, not getting beat up so much as I had. Uh, I had pain in my Achilles tendons as young as 5 or 6. First time I felt my heel hurting or something like that. I had the last year I was boxing, I honed my skills to a degree that I being a professional boxer was really um, it was something that just felt like it would be natural to do it, and I wanted to at least win a national title before I quit. And uh, just one day, this pain that I had in my right heel, not the heel, but just the portion of the Achilles tendon that just coming up the foot, right down, just above where it would meet the heel. After a 6 mile run, I was limping. I remember going to the gym that day, and my coach said, "Yeah, there's no way you're going to work out today," and uh, I had I had to end up seeing a specialist just to get through that last year of boxing. So that was one thing that was it was an excuse, really. Okay, I don't have to go into it and do it. and all that dedication, everything. And at the same time, I'd had a college degree at that point in English, a BA in English, and I had this idea of being a writer, and I really felt like people wouldn't, the way people would perceive me as a fighter, as a rugged guy, they wouldn't recognize my intellectual development and take me as seriously because I wasn't doing something that was uh, intellectually significant. So I thought I wanted to make some kind of contribution to the world in that way, as someone that actually people would take seriously talking about the way the world is and what policies should be, or
Hmm.
how life should be. So that was the thing. And I also, I mean, I come from a pretty intelligent family. I mean, my father, he had an accounting degree from St. John's University in a place called Collegeville, Minnesota, and had gone ROTC and went to the Army. Then when he came out, he started out in accounting working for the government. Then he became an independent insurance agent. My mother had a history and a degree with an English minor, and was a grade school teacher who left and started working city jobs. And when I was 12, went to night school for law school and became a lawyer. So, and my father had sent us to this uh, a, a pretty prestigious Catholic military high school it's outside of St. Paul called St. Thomas Academy. And the people I went to school with were all pretty high level intellectual, and I just kind of felt a pressure not to be a boxer. So it was I always had that pull between me, and I never, even though I went into to writing and stuff like that, I always had jobs that would be that would not be necessarily the level of needing a college degree, because I always wanted to concentrate on writing. And then I could never go away from boxing, so I spent a lot of time in boxing also, where working with helping different trainers, working with different fighters. So unfortunately, throughout my life, I haven't been pursuing until now. I'm trying to pursue more of the endeavors that bring in a higher level of income.
Yeah. We mentioned earlier that you spent some time working in Alaska. What did that time working in Alaska, were exposed to Native American culture. How did that shape your spiritual journey?
Okay, well, so there's a guy that I mentioned in this book named Kevin O'Rourke, a really accomplished writer and poet, an award-winning poet who was a I call him a Mississippi River barge hand poet because that's what he was. He was in his 40s when I met him. I was in my early 20s. He's the guy that exposed me to Native American culture. He was a guy who found his sobriety with friends in the Lakota Sioux tradition, and he went down to Sundances in Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. And he eventually took me there, actually, the year after I had worked on the fishing boat in Alaska. And the whole thing about going to Alaska was while in college, you used to see these advertisements in the back of the college newspaper about, you make a whole bunch of money and over the summer in Alaska, you can
Right.
go work on this boat or that boat. Well, actually, someone in a guy in the local Irish American community who had ended up going up to Alaska, and another guy, and they're talking about people like they're my parents' age. So this guy was in his 40s at the time. He owns a gill net boat uh, in Southeast Alaska, and he kind of advised me on what to do going to Seattle and walking boat to boat to look for a fishing boat job. And he specifically said you wanted to get on a seiner, a salmon seine boat. Seine, named after the River Seine. It's a type of nets that they use.
Hmm.
because that's actually the entry level of commercial fishing. It's the easiest thing to teach. It's hard to do. You're going 16 hours at a time or more. There was one day I was up for 26 hours, I think, in a row. But it's something that you can learn how to do it, and it's not the hardest thing to do. The hardest thing to do is crabbing, which I never did any of that. I didn't go back the second season. The second season is because I didn't go back is because I wanted to explore this Native American stuff, right? And so, um, but how did that influence me? That that was my when I quit boxing, I said, okay, I'm gonna go have my Jack Kerouac adventure, you know. I'm gonna go do this on the road kind of thing. And it was about 5 months away. It was the summer was working in Seattle, then up in Alaska for a couple of months, and waited around and got my check and sent a bunch of money home and was paying off some student loans and had a couple of thousand in my pocket. And this is 1994, so a couple of thousand really went a lot farther than it would go today. And I drove down the coast. Uh, I went around the country a little bit before I'd come back. And that's what that was about. And I compiled a whole bunch of writing at the time. And it eventually got stolen from my car, but
Oh
that's
man.
something that I won't tell that whole story now because that's actually a dramatic point that I express in the book at a certain point and how I recovered from that. But so how did that? I'm telling you the details about it, but I don't know if I've specifically answered your question. You said, how did it influence me? It just really at that time it was the first time that I gotten away from everything and just kind of was alone a lot and was able to just really sort of dive into my heart and think about what's going on in my life, what am I doing, and kind of resolving, you know, just the well, I guess it was a time when I was really starting to explore, spiritually explore what the nature of God is and what my place is in the world. And that was a really lonely time, but it was a really good time. And since then, I've just continued uh, pursuing life day by day, always having some ambition and just kind of uh, trying, just figuring things out since then.
Good. So your book, It's About Time. What themes do you explore in that book?
Well, love, family, and life, uh, encouragement, and hope. So it's written. The importance of fatherhood and the importance of family are really central. I talk about the influence of my dad and how, you know, throughout life, there are times when I had major disagreements with him. There are times when I didn't want to be around him at all, where I didn't really think of myself as being like him or wanting to be like him. And as I got older and realized, uh, he was actually, how kids usually don't think their parents are cool, right? I actually think he was a pretty cool guy. And uh I said he was an insurance salesman. And so he knew everyone in the Twin Cities. I mean, especially in St. Paul. And he was the kind of guy that could carry on a conversation with anyone, but he was always respectful to people. And he always he was a tough guy, but he didn't try to be tough. He was strict in many ways, but he was also easygoing and knew how to have a good time. And uh, so one thing I realized is that pretty much everything he told me was the truth. He was always right. And one thing I really respect about him is that he didn't lie to me. And he didn't lie to me even when it might have been easier to let things go or to but he just wanted me to know the truth about the things I faced in life. And as far as the values of the book, I mean, love, family, and life, really, um, that's in one of the poems I have in here. I mean, so it's really it's an autobiography that reads like a novel, and it has 20 poems running through it. And uh, one of the poems is called "Life So Simple." I say, I say to the the person whom I'm addressing, he says, your guardian angel already talked to mine. Together they've watched us share laughter and argue to the point of crying. You know they're sent by God who really does exist and is not a tyrant or a terrorist. Rather, he is love, family, life, held in common at the core. You and I, specific spokes united in the center, spinning around from place to place and nothing more. The metaphor of the spokes united in the center, I'm talking about a bicycle wheel. But um love, family, and life, that's a good interpretation of who God is. And as a Catholic, we talk about the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Another way to describe that is it's the nature of a family. It's they're three persons equal, and consubstantial with each other. And that's really a way to look at humanity, is that we're all a family. We're the family of God. You know what I'm saying? And so those what I just said about that is not said specifically in the book, but that theme runs through it. And I'm talking about having lost my dad and realizing I haven't written and published a book yet. I haven't got married, had children yet. All this stuff I wanted my dad to see me do. And so that's why I wrote the book. The opening line in the book is, I can't, and by the way, it's about time, parentheses, millions of copies sold for dad. And the reason I added that parenthetical portion of the title is because one of the guys who advised me on this book said, it's a good book, it's a good manuscript, but you can't really market. It's just about time because there's so many. It's too esoteric, and how do you put that on a bookshelf? And and it's if you add those parentheses while going to the internet for it, you find it faster because there are a lot of books called by that title. But uh, it's like it's about time I did something that I know my dad would look at and be really happy. And it's an accomplishment. You say, okay, you've done something significant. Not that I had to prove myself to him or anything, because I didn't, but because he accepted me and loved me anyway, either way. But I just had to get it out there and do it because I was at a point in my life where I think I procrastinated way too much, and I have to just kind of kick it in gear and do this and then move on to the next thing, you know. And so finally, I'll say uh, it's about the book is meant to be encouraging. So it's written to emphasize the value of family. It's to promote marriage. I believe it's really important. It's really never cut down people for the family situation or people who haven't been able to stay married or haven't gotten married. But woman and man coming together and being their mother and father in that family unit and loving each other is something that gives so much security to a child. And I realized that by working with children in temporary emergency homeless situations, how important that is. And even though I haven't been married and I haven't got any children myself, it's a responsibility I have to be a respectful man in general community, in general society, to be uh, some kind of an example of just decency for children growing up. And so ultimately, it's written to honor St. Paul. It gives a little nod to Minneapolis, and it is also written for America because I think that we've gone through this century. We've been going through a real kind of battle of figuring out who we are. And I wrote it at the time where we lived through these riots right in my metropolitan area that were so impactful on the world. And I want us to stay together as a country. So I really, I'm also I've written this for America, and I'm also writing it for uh, people to be encouraged and to find hope.
Well, one more question about the book. So, what ways does your book reflect your exploration of the Catholic faith, your Irish heritage, and Native American traditions?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so um, the Irish heritage in St. Paul. I'm not an immediate Irish immigrant family. You know, we've been here, we've been here for 6 generations, right? I'm not full-blooded Irish. I'm ultimately what I am is I'm American, and uh, but I grew up with this Catholic faith, and I went to Catholic schools from first grade through 12th grade, and actually through college until the last year and a half. I graduated from University of Minnesota, so the Catholic influence has always been a major part of my life, even when I was not not making it to mass every Sunday, the period when I kind of strayed away a little bit. Um, Saying the Hail Mary to myself over and over again is something that when I need something, it's just something I always fall back on. And it's just something that has always been there. Uh, that and the Our Father, but mainly that Hail Mary. Um, so I've always had this belief that there is a God and that there is a guard. We all have a guardian angel, and that God is always there witnessing what we do and a part of our lives for all of us. And as far as the Irish heritage is concerned, I got there was kind of a cultural revival going on, you know, in the 1980s into the 90s that really centered around the troubles in Ireland, and I there were people involved with this kind of cultural revival in the United States. I met like chaperones that came over from this children's program. Actually, was for children of prisoners um, in the north. And I met some of those chaperones, and I had places to stay in the north when I went over there, as well as in Dublin and other areas. And so I wrote about it, and uh, there was a solidarity built up with Native American Indian community at that time too, and that's how when I mentioned that poet Kevin O'Rourke, who took me into that Sundance tradition. And so that was exploring the situation of the American Indian and what the American Indian culture, the indigenous culture of America had to go through with the colonization. I felt that kind of uh, a kind of identification with them, and that's what motivated me to go into the community. And I figured also in working at a homeless shelter was a job that it wasn't it wasn't like working at an advertising agency. It wasn't going to take 60 hours a week of this intellectual thing. So maybe I could concentrate on writing too. And anyway, there's this maybe I could share with you
Yeah.
this little portion of the book. So I had returned to full-time work there in the early 2000s as I was trying to get my creative endeavors together and my boxing endeavors together. And I was working the weekend overnight shift, third shift, while trying to establish my personal training business during the week. So I was always tired. So here's the portion. Constantly tired, always worried that I wasn't writing enough or wasn't at the gym enough, frustrated that I wasn't pulling in enough money on my freelance endeavors to quit my straight job. I was at that shelter every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 11 p.m., working till 8 a.m. the next morning. One night, at least a year into that overnight position, There was a little black boy, 5 years old and placed in shelter just that day, who slept on the couch because he was too scared to be on the boys' floor in the darkness of the old house. And while I was in the kitchen doing the dishes after midnight, I heard him crying hysterically through the sound of the water spraying on pots and pans. I remember there was nothing I could do, so I just kneeled on the floor next to the couch and gave him a hug and rocked back and forth, saying, "You're a good boy. You're a good boy." At the time, on Monday mornings, Dad would pick me up at my apartment after work and take me to breakfast. I'd been doing so many things, reaching the middle of my 30s and trying to establish myself to the level I thought I should have reached in my 20s, so I was very busy. Dad told me he wasn't spending enough time with me in my adult years and wanted me to commit to seeing him once a week. That was a time when Dad altered his approach to many issues in life, even eventually, at Mom's insistence, going to counseling at the VA and getting evaluated for post-traumatic stress disorder. Even though he'd been married his entire adult life, had no chemical dependencies, and was never unemployed, which are considered the biggest indicators, at least on the surface level, he said, they diagnosed him with it. That's understandable because he saw a lot of fighting and death in Vietnam and almost died there himself before his 24th birthday. But I told him he was crazy. There was no way I could commit to seeing him once a week. I just didn't have the time. Why not? Because, Dad, I'm trying to do so many things. I just don't have the time. Fine, he said. I guess you can come spend time with me at my funeral. That hit me hard. I committed to his request and we had breakfast together once a week for the last 15 years of his life.
Mm.
That's the best decision I ever made. Anyway, he picked me up Monday morning after the weekend I'd worked when I had to comfort that 5-year-old boy alone at the shelter. He said hi, and we sat for a moment as I told him about it, and I just couldn't help it. I started to cry a little. It was good to be with my dad. I always knew who he was and that he was always in my life, and I was always his son. I never had any confusion about who I was or to whose family I belonged. Later that year, when I met with Lynn in her office for my employee evaluation, she gave me a great compliment. "The way I see you," she said, "is you're like the doorman." "Really?" I said. "Yeah, like the doorman in the sweat." "Yeah," I said, "I know exactly what you mean." The doorman is positioned by the door in the sweat lodge, ready to yell out, "Aho, Matakuyasin," which means all my relations in Lakota and Dakota, signaling the fireman standing outside to pull open the cloth door to let air in and cool it down. The doorman makes sure everyone in the sweat lodge is physically all right, that no one gets hurt from the intense heat. "Yeah," she said, "especially for the younger kids. Your role here is to make them safe." Sometime in the next year or two, being both lonely and alone, realizing I was in the latter portion of my middle 30s, still hadn't found a wife, and still spent all my weekends, the time I believed people were out meeting the ones they'd be with, working awake overnight in that shelter, I wrote the following poem. They call me a doorman. It's actually a false start, the opening to a much longer story I never got back to, but it came from that conversation with Lynn, so I include it here as a short, standalone poem. They call me a doorman. About 2005, I wrote this. They call me a doorman. That's because I watch the door. I guard the door. I protect the people. I didn't choose this role. It chose me. The people decided, and I accepted. I guess I didn't really have a choice unless I wanted to spend my days in hell, because that's the price you pay when you refuse your destiny, or so I have learned. But that is my personal understanding of the human journey through life, and it is better explained at a later time. Suffice it for now to say I am a doorman. Stay with me through my story, and if you hear with your heart as well as you can listen with your ears, when you are ready, you will understand. So that's just a little touch, touches just a little on the kind of connections I had that I made between Irish heritage, Native American heritage, and the Catholic faith, and my time uh, on the Red Road, as they call it, exploring the Native American spirituality. Um, Another thing I say at a certain point is, in the sweat lodge, uh, the belief is that on the rocks, when they sing the songs and say the prayers, that they're inviting their ancestors in to dance on those rocks. And they say their prayers, and then when they do the what's called the going home song, the last round of the 4 rounds of prayer that they do, um, that the ancestors take those prayers back to the Creator, back to God. And I thought of it as, boy, that's a parallel. It's not the same thing. And I'm not trying to say I'm not, I'm pretty, I'm, I'm very much a sincere Catholic. So I don't tell people to equate this as being the same thing, but it's a parallel. And there's a truth we can find in other people's traditions, and we can concentrate on that and say, okay, and have open up a dialogue and say, this is where we understand the fullness of truth to be, but that's a parallel to the communion of saints. I mean, I personally believe that my mother and father are watching over me now, that they're, and I prayerfully believe them to be, and hopefully believe them, in hope. My prayer is that where they are now is they are gazing perpetually into um, the beatific vision of the face of God. And while looking at the face of God, because God is love, they can see me and they can be watching over me. That's one thing my mother said to me a couple of days before she died. I said, it's too early for you to die now. I just need more. And she says, it's okay. I'll always be watching over you. And um, that's when I mentioned earlier the family of God, or God being a family. We are made in the image and likeness of God. So that makes us part of the family of God. Um, and so uh, that's what the whole concept of the communion of saints is, and that's what Christianity accepts, that there's this communion of saints, which is to say, those who are in heaven, they're more alive than we are, and so they hear our prayers, that they're in communication with God, that we're all together as one. And so that's I'm not trying to get into a Catholic Protestant debate or anything, but but that's our understanding of it.
Yeah.
And so there's
Well,
there's the answer to the question, I think.
yeah. Last question here, Mark, that we ask everybody because the podcast is called Your Best Day Yet. How would you go about describing your best day yet for you?
A day when I've come as close as I can to understanding the will of God for me and gracefully carrying it out to the best of my ability. And that just comes down to letting people, especially my family and the people that I are closest to me, know that I love them and respect them. And I'm sorry if I'm not giving you something more specific, an
Oh,
example
no,
of one thing I'd
that's
be
good.
doing, but that's the best I can think of. I was thinking of answering that question when I looked at them as you sent them to me previously. Um, and I answered a question like that one time in college, talking about the stuff I would like to do, just the activities I do during the day. But I think that it's a little deeper than that, because whatever I'm doing, I may be stuck doing something that's really unjust that I shouldn't have to be doing, but uh, as long as I can be doing it with the understanding that I'm going to do my best to do good and at least not do harm. Whatever I'm doing, at least that's what I'm doing.
Good, good, good. That's a good answer. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for being on the show. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you were inspired by Mark's words. Again, his book, It's About Time. Go ahead and lift it up there. Do you
Yeah.
have it?
So the best way is to go to boxersandwritersmagazine.com/books. All spelled out, boxersandwritersmagazine.com/books. If you click onto that page, you can get it at Lulu and Amazon. So those are the two places that you can order it online. So Amazon, everyone knows, and then Lulu,
Yeah.
Lulu. Those are the two sites that it's on. If you're in St. Paul, Minnesota, it's in one store called Irish on Grand, an Irish bookstore. But otherwise, Amazon.com or Lulu.
All
And
right.
it's boxersandwritersmagazine.com.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. Guys, like I said, all for today. Really appreciate you giving us some words of wisdom, Mark. And, go ahead. If you need more information, folks, follow us at centerforvictory.com. And just remember, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, make this your best day yet. We'll see you soon.